This is the Reading Rainbow Emperor with that one subscriber face reveal. And I'm reviewing The Broken Man by Hawkins Austin. I'm going to pay attention here. This is a cover. This right here. Oh, so fine. So lovely. So dramatic. Anyway, it's a great cover. I pretty much bought into this book on the virtue of the cover alone, and I'm not going to say it's the best part of it, but it's a solid top 3 for me. The Broken Man is a unique entry in the Superversive canon, and it's set in some sort of fantasy, not quite Ireland. It's a mix of a ghost story and Celtic myth. The book is a masterclass on world building, which I'll get into in a minute. And even though the world building does have hiccups, especially when you create something and you focus so much on the world building, it's very easy to sort of make a mistake. There's a few there that I'll point out that I think are quite interesting and good pitfalls to avoid if you're watching this and you're writing your own work. But also, definitely going to point out all the good parts to it, just so you guys know. It never, like any of the things that bother me are mostly things that bother me and not like things that bother everyone else. Like, I haven't heard anyone else really talk about this. And I'm not some guy's like, oh, if nobody else is talking about it, I guess it's just not really a thing. No. Nobody's talking about this as well as they should. And if you're the only guy in the room with a YouTube channel dedicated to superversive and conservative and pulp rev and Gundam for Us literature, I've got a monopoly until somebody comes around and does it better. So the plot of this book is pretty simple. Waylaid, a Fomor giant turned spirit talker, priest thing, wizard, sorcerer, and some of those aren't in order. And Piju are called upon to exercise or fight some malevolent entity that has been killing children and absorbing their essences and all sorts of horrible things. And in the meantime, there's a whole bunch of like side plot, which honestly I don't need to get into because it's important for multiple books, but some of the things show up, and it's like, foreshadowing, foreshadowing. Actually, yeah, this is I actually did open it up to a passage of foreshadowing. So, it's kind of hard to critique it as much as I'd like for some of those things, because it's like, this is clearly put in there with a purpose. However, it does slow down the story for a page, and there's multiple of those. However, I've been reading the sequel called The Bone God, the sequel to The Broken Man, and it's actually starting to pay off a bit. So it's like, The main characters are Piju and Waylaid, but also there's some Bolg, which are the kind of shortest and least civilized on Fantasy Island. Then we have the Ruad, which are the second shortest, but they act like they're cock of the walks with their red hair and all that jazz, who have enslaved some of the Bolg because they won a war against them, but they lost a war against the Dane, who are fighting the Fomor and themselves in things that I'm sure will matter eventually. But I'm going to go through the series whenever they come out, whenever I decide I want to do them. So, there's that. It's all kind of mixing in, and it's kind of like this witch's cauldron of plot, It's like there's Keenan's sort of thing, and then there's Mrs. Brea's kind of damage, and so on and so forth. Until finally, I'm actually enjoying this more than I thought I would, because now I can see my expressions and I can sort of manage what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, and it's like, oh, I can actually increase it. So all right, I still kind of wish I had the light behind me, but that's a different sort of thing. Anyway, PG wants to free the Bolg from slavery because they're mostly women and children. The Rod want to keep the Bolg in slavery as well as kind of sort of get freedom. But the thing is, they don't have the power for it, and they think that the Dane Civil War can get them that power. But the problem is, they have trouble with like 3 of them. They're not gonna, it's one of those things that's like, no, no, guys, no. The Rod are like the worst part of this, but it's like they fit in the story very well, so it's not like a problem for Hawkins Austin, like in his writing. But I hate the Rod. Like, and I'm sure it's part of it, but it's like, oh, no, stop it. You guys are like the weakest group next to the Bolg. Anyway. So there's as I've already mentioned, there's great separation between the various tribes, with the Bolg kind of being on the bottom, then Ruad, Dane, and then Fulmore, with the Fulmore and the Dane fighting each other. The Fulmore are giants. Usually they're sorcerers. They got strange and powerful magics. They're like, I want to say 10 feet tall or so, with the Dane being about 7-ish. The Rod being, I think, 6 to 5, and then the Bolg being like 5. I think that's accurate. It feels accurate because they are head and shoulders above the Rod, who are kind of head and shoulders above the Bolg. So, anyway, each of the tribe. One of the good things about the world building is that each of the tribes feels different from each other one. The Fulmore, the Dane, and the Rod and the Bolg all feel different. The Bolg are kind of like super uncivilized. I want to call them Picts because Hawkins Austin has a background in archaeology and a few other things, as I understand it. It's not outside the idea that he's sort of transposing various tribes into it, or tribes from Celtic, Irish, etc. mythology, to create something fresh. Probably the best point about this book is that there's nothing like it, and I love those unique flavors. Flavors. Because honestly, in this meta, in this literary meta, there aren't a lot going around, and if they are, they're usually bad. At least the ones I've kind of looked at, or like I usually read a lot of Amazon samplers and stuff like that, and here's the first 2 chapters that they often provide, and it's like, nope. And as a result of that, my Amazon algorithm's kind of messed up. So good, bad, I don't know. But anyway, one of the things that kind of sticks though is that all 3 of the 4 magical tribes have magical powers or abilities or something that allows them to function better with each other and within the world around them. The Bolg have their spirit magic, which I grant doesn't seem to really do much outside spirit stuff. Then we have the Dane battle magic, I guess I'll call it, and their blessing of the mother. Then we have the Fulmore sorcery, which seems to be something everyone fears, except for the Ruad upper class. It's one of those things, they kind of fear it when it's convenient for the plot and when they need a riot scene and stuff like that. But in practice, it doesn't really work out too well. And I'll talk about the politics for it in a second. It's basically an atheist thing. Like, if an atheist, we live in a world that has tons of miracles. I'm not even talking about like the Catholic miracles, like the dancing sun and stuff like that. Not the dancing sun. Lady at Fatima. The various things that they do. But there's also Protestant and Orthodox miracles that do happen. By the way, miracles aren't a sign of faithfulness at all. It's like that's like a Gideon thing where you throw the sheep thing out. But it's like many atheists say, "We'll produce God." God's already done it. He's already done a whole bunch of stuff out there, and you just refuse to accept the results because it's a very arbitrary thing. So the Rod are kind of in that position, and they're very atheistic, and it's weird because they'll insult their betters. And I'll talk about this when I talk about politics and the Rawad. But they have no cojones to back it up. They don't. Like, I don't know whether this was Hawking Austin's intention to make them so kind of pathetic where they only can beat up on the Bolg. Kinda. Sometimes. But there's a whole bunch of weird things that I don't think really add up to create sort of a logical reaction to the world. You can say that such things are superstition, the Force users and stuff like that, a hokey old religion and stuff like that. That's fine. That's not really a problem. Han Solo can believe what he wants about the Force and all that jazz. But the thing is, when they actually demonstrate the Force, Han doesn't be like, well, it's just an accident, guys. It's not real. He said, oh, okay, sorry. Oh, your mentor got killed, kid. He rolls with the punches. The Rawad don't really do that. They've experienced firsthand the Dane going berserk and just wiping them out and conquering them, but they still, I don't know, haven't internalized it or something. And I'll actually read out a bit where they insult it. It's very weird, and I don't know whether there's a payoff or if they're being willful about it. Like, they value knowledge and concrete facts and stuff like that. But the world around them, because we are taking the perspective of these magical people who have these various, skills and abilities, and we see them work around. Piju's a sorcerer. Waylaid is a sorcerer. That things happen, and they can't be explained, but then they're willful about it. Again, that's probably just back to the atheist thing. But on the other hand, everyone else's reaction to things are pretty normal and natural, and I think that helps that because the other characters, the Bolg, the Ruad, the Dane, and the Fomor characters are more developed than any Ruad characters we have. In fact, I don't recall a single main Ruad character besides the king, kind of, but honestly, he's definitely a secondary character. He shows up like once. And the whole thing about it is that they're trying to get blame the Fomor as well for killing the kids for sorcery, and then it's like sorcery doesn't exist, so we must be killing them some way else, and it's like, anyway. But I think that creates a pretty good change in between the various tribes, like the separation between the Rawad and everyone else. And then we have the separation of the Dane with everyone else, the Bolg with everyone else, and the Fomor with everyone else, but they all interact with each other. And it creates, honestly, this really good medley that, seems to have a lot of depth. It feels like very much a real world. It's not like real world where you know what the tax policies are. They kind of do. Like George R. R. Martin said of thing, like, what's Aragorn's tax policy? 10% of whatever the land gets, like, duh. But whatever was in classic England. But it's that sort of depth between the tribes and their interactions. Each of the tribe has a unique look, a unique feel, unique hairstyles even. And at no point are you confused as to what you're talking to. Besides the fact that the office says Ruad, Dane, Fomor, Bolg. Just how they do it just works out great. What's more, the atmosphere and history are certainly there. There's this great scene where Waylaid has a vision in the cellar where he sees someone else. Let's see here. My goodness. I put it in the wrong page. Waylay looked up at the sun shine. Oh wait, hold on. Waylay looked right to the left and the right, hoping for a bench as his foot was already hurting him badly today. The light improved while he listened to Seth humming tunelessly, the notes echoing around the barren walls. The change was gradual, but suddenly Waylay realized he could see the floor as clear as day. Waylay looked up at the sun shining down through the light tower. The floor overhead was much higher now, easily twice the height of a Fomor. The light was directed into the floor where it bounced off white glazed tiles and shone on the baths themselves. Two were heated, though their fireboxes were set low in the midst of summer, and the two were cold for washing off after steam. Of course, there was a steam room adjacent. The steam poured out of the south side room and was drawn up the light tower like smoke up a chimney. And then there's this Fomor woman. They talk for a bit. Uh, Waylay cleared his throat, his arms confusedly moving between the signs of kind regard and painful regret. I need to keep moving, O most beautiful woman, but I shall endeavor to keep that assignation in the near future. You are most kind, she said. As disappointed as I am that you'll not be joining me, I allow you to make amends in the future, so to that account I'll tell you that the stable is right through there. She pointed to the eastern arch and stepped into the sea room. Master Waylay, what are you doing? He turned to face the man, blinking away dust or cobweb that had temporarily obscured his vision. The Fomor servant faded away, leaving a Dane warrior priest. I'm wondering why I'm not in the steam room with a beautiful woman. I suspect, said Seth, it might be because we don't have a steam room, or possibly because neither one of us are a beautiful woman, or beautiful women. Waylay blinked in again, and realized he was standing in the cold, damp cellar, with no indication of any steam, and no openings on any walls. There was a pain inside, a dislocation between the vision and the reality, as though he was almost in two places at once. It faded, and he felt the solidarity of the world around him again. And this is from the beginning, where the Shadow Man is about to murder an innocent child. Let's see here. It flickered at the edge of the trees, a faint light in the dark shadows. At first all that could be seen was an empty place, a dark shadow with a hint of starlight at its core. Then a fire would catch, brightening the whole outline, a beautiful fire which illuminated him for a bare moment. Arms, legs, torso, and then faded away. The head was always in darkness, never showing an outline, and leaving only the fire of his eyes. The flame had caught there, burning gently where the eyes should be. His body faded away, but the eyes remained. They seemed like a pair of dim flames hovering in the darkness. Beneath them was a handful of beautiful lights Beneath them, a handful of beautiful lights moved gently in the slow circles. There was nothing in the light, but it seemed strangely solid in the shadows. The Shadow Man moved slowly forward through the trees to the edge of the clearing, pushing aside a branch as though it were as solid as a man. And that's actually a pretty good scene. There's a chase. And, of course, the child dies, setting off the whole plot. Overall, it's pretty solid descriptions. I always know kind of the feel as to where it is. There's other great scenes like when Waylay deals with another ghost, another woman of his past who seems to have control over nature. It's also really good. There's a lot of really decent reading scenes in this, and the cadence and tone just kind of work for me for a lot of it. That and the depth, the atmosphere, the history of it, it's really all just a very much a complete thing. The problems come in because there's kind of a few things that kind of weird me out. With the book, that kind of like when I read it, it's like it didn't bother me enough to stop reading it. But I did go, I would have done this, I would have done that. So the first thing is the politics of the Wad. And the thing is that it's mostly like they don't seem to act to me like a conquered people, and they're willing to fight things that honestly I don't really feel like it works out. Let's see here. Three low-ranked philosophers gather near the door. That's their like noble caste, sort of. There's nobles and then there's philosophers, and mostly they're mixed. None had more than 3 bands upon their sleeve, but they held themselves as though they were kings among men. They spoke with hushed tones, but with full voice to their words. It seemed a performance. At first sight, Brea believed them to be thoughtless puppets of some higher-ranked philosopher, who wished to show this show, but dared not perform himself. She prepared herself for a minor jest or a token display of resistance against the rule of the blessed folk. That's how the Dane referred to themselves. Perhaps the Dane's imaginary friend can convince the slave's imaginary friend to play nice. They laughed behind their hands while pretending to bow to the 7-banded philosopher leading the judge from the chambers. Brea felt white heat enter her, cleansing her mind as she turned to them. Her right hand reached out as if of its own volition and grabbed Answerer, still in its scabbard, and pulled it to her. Her left hand gripped the sheath, and it slid to her left hip, ready to draw. The hip hilt pulsed with a sudden red heat. They start playing around a bit. Keenan, who's the best character, honestly. Best waifu. Not really. Best character, though, certainly. Prepares to fight for it. And this is actually where we establish, this is one of the places that established the rules for Berserker Gang. How they basically are like, okay, protect the Berserker, because they're going to do most of the heavy lifting, but you got to protect them from themselves and from side attacks, essentially. Attacks from behind. We have a bit of a fight scene. Bunch of Rumen people leave. Let's see here. So here's where the politics kind of comes in. Keenan spoke to the king, taking on his herald's voice. He spoke loudly but calmly into the sudden silence. Do you wish to formally request of the Judge of the Dane to spare the life of your philosopher? The king thinks for a bit. No, replied his majesty thoughtfully. I see that I have mistaken in stopping you. Please carry on. The man on the floor tipped forward and placed his palms by Brea's feet, staring at the marble floor. He found a voice. It was tiny and dry, but he used it. Please, spare me. And she does. And Orn uses it for foreshadowing. Foreshadowing! So it's like they don't have anything to back it up. And people are idiots. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be idiots or anything like that. And especially in literature, otherwise there wouldn't be any stories. But it sort of strikes me as very odd. Like, what's the point of taunting somebody? Did they expect them that they were only conquered like 20 years ago or something? Like, sure, these guys could have grown up. Like, it feels very strange. Like this whole scene. It doesn't feel like it's natural to how the Ruad, who are portrayed as careful if non-superstitious thinkers throughout the text, with their own like side meanings and stuff like that, to do it. And even though Brea is like high priestess of the land, it always strikes me as like, yeah, they're gonna taunt me. Haha, they taunted me, so I'm gonna cut off their heads. Like, sure, the religion is sacred. Like, this scene kind of doesn't really jive with me and how I view it. But I guess it will but it does set up things that were used for foreshadowing, and it used in the next book, The Bone God. So it's like, it's kind of hard for me to really criticize it. It's like, I don't know, like it's just like, people call things my imaginary friend all the time, and while I would like to backhand them, it's not something that's done, even for this thing. Like, it's like the atheists are acting like atheists. The atheists aren't respecting you. Okay, I'm going on about this too long. It's just one of those things. It's like, like these Rod guys, they talk about this stuff all the time. They talk a big game. They count the numbers. It's like, okay, we can take like 50 of their guys, but we would lose like half of our forces, or like any number of things. Let's blame the Fomor for our problems, and then use them to break free or something. It's all just very kind of like, it's like one of those things. It's like, it's not how I envision that sort of world going on, I guess. I don't know. I'm going to drop it for now. Hopefully, it improves with the next few books, because there is a lot of things that get paid off in the next book, and I'm sure in the next book after that, and so on. Now, something that really did bother me, and I have a very concrete feeling about it, is the Berserker scene at the ending of it. I'll read it out. They're fighting the last boss. Whaley's doing a sorcery. By the way, the sorcery in this is very cool. The whole scene's pretty interesting, but the only thing I could say about the film is they needed another scene to show up somewhere around the middle. But that's just me. Where is it? It's they're talking about the monster. It suddenly stood between Brea and Seth. She whirled and cut downward, answer singing through the airs across the night. The monster vanished as quickly as it appeared, and her sword passed through the insubstantial shadows into Seth's guard. Seth blocked, now effortlessly. I don't get the whole now effortlessly thing with his blade, but the answerer shattered it. I think there was something going on. Anyway. Brea stood there, dazed for a second time from her rage. Her blade split from the bronze crown of his helmet, but she held the stroke from his skin. Seth panted. The blade should have split his skull, and it should have. The blade pulled back, and the two halves of the mask fell to the ground. She wavered, seeking her center again, and so on and so forth. So this is something pretty concrete. I believe that Seth should have died in that scene. And I don't mean it in some sort of like Game of Thrones bump 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 murder da 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 da. It's more of a thing where they set up the Berserker gang for a very long time in the book, and now we're getting the payoff. The payoff is she's going berserk with her friends and trying to kill the ghostly apparition that has been killing kids, among other things. As you can tell, it's quite laid out. And for some reason, I haven't been sleeping well. Anyway, so they set up the Berserker scene. They say that she's, Berserkers are a danger to those in front of them and those behind them and all that jazz. And you have to guard them, but at the same time, if you point them in the right direction, they'll kill everything. So the problem is that with that, I understand that Seth could have been used for something. We've been kind of talking about him, but if we're going to establish that they're straight up like Nordic berserkers, they should deal damage to their friends. Like, even though this isn't the type of book to kill a lot of people who aren't like victims of the various sorceries that they somehow caused or are a part of, or just an innocent victim of. When you set up a theme of Berserker gang within certain characters, which Keenan has, Brea has, and all that jazz, Brea's damage is the fact that her husband's dead. Keenan's damage is his horrible, horrible memories that forces him to makes him turn to drink, and I assume others. And there seems to be a cost to it. However, unless the cost doesn't seem to be paid in this situation, she's going crazy. They're doing this long, hard fight. She's in her rage, and she's able to stop herself on a millimeter. Like a just little hair's breadth from the nose. And while it's a cool scene and concept, I don't think it's the proper payoff for the Berserker stuff that has been set up hitherto now. And it might seem sort of a strange complaint, because it is a cool scene. But it's also like it's the best way to say it is that it's inappropriate to what's been put up beforehand. If he had been putting more control into the berserkers, that would make sense. But there's no other scene like this that I can really tell. She might pull herself back from the brink, she might fight with everyone else, but she's just slaughtering everything in her path, and none of her men are dumb enough to get in front of her. Then there's somebody actually in front of her. Therefore, I think it's perfectly logical for the author to follow through. And I would do that myself. I assume that there's some plan for Seth in the future. If there isn't, I would actually be pretty disappointed because that would mean that essentially he sacrificed the gravitas of the Berserker stuff, because this is a book full of gravitas, um, in exchange for not killing a side character who won't matter again. I'm not all the way through the Bone God, so. There's a weird scene where the riot shows up, but the problem is that it's from the population of the farms, and we're never given a good feeling as to how populated those farms are. So like it's like there's a whole scene where Waylade is traveling around in the chariot. I would personally have that place way more populated so that the farmers have some place to come from when they do their rioting. Because their kids are being killed by the Spectre, and they're blaming the one Fomor in the magical Ireland land. So like that's a pretty simple little thing. Like it's one of those things where he's focused so much on the main city and like all the side bits in the different worlds with other people that it doesn't really work for the rest of it. To not have people and stuff go around, like it's just kind of like there's like 5 or 6 people, I think, in the ending when they go to the house where the little girl died, like 2 or 3 families, and it's like, but then why was Waylade able to travel around in a chariot for so long by himself, even though he was near farmland? Like, sure, he was trying to avoid people, but it's one of those things. It's like it felt too empty. And while it's some great scenes, I love the scene where he talks to that sort of like I don't know what to call her, farm spirit. So this foam or ghost he picked up, that I'm sure will mean something in the end. Uh, that'll that Yeah, it was a pretty good scene. I liked it. The last sort of thing I have with this, because unlike with Jake and the Dynamo, that kind of just had one thing to it, where like there's one sort of instance where it breaks its own narrative and rules uh, to be ultra serious when it doesn't need to be ultra serious. But then with this, the thing is everything's ultra serious all the time. There's a little bit of humor, but it's not really funny unless I'm missing it. In which case, but there's times when characters do stuff like Piju wanders out into the forest when he should be guarding the girl, and then comes back, or he's hunting and stuff like that, and he comes back and he brings back information about the barrow, if I recall correctly. But the scene itself takes way longer than it felt way longer than it actually was, and I'm not sure why. Uh, Part of it was that we didn't really have a good feeling for the villain. So there wasn't as much tension there for Piju as there probably should have been, because the villain doesn't only shows up at the beginning and the end, and uh, there's greater villains running around like Waylade's bro or the Dane Civil War or any number of things, but yeah, I can't really recall the villain showing up between this and that, and the Ruad and all that jazz. And I dig it. It's not really a story about him, but if we had something more to sort of be like, ooh, Piju's could be in trouble, it could have done something to help Piju. Piju scenes where he goes out and searches and wanders through the forest to have much more value to it. Um, I think I vaguely remember a scene, but the thing is, it was kind of just like one and done. It's kind of over with. There was no ego or like personality to the villain to latch on to say that, oh, he is charismatic, oh, he's a wicked sorcerer and all that jazz. It's just, yeah, he's evil. He's using children's souls to power his ghost thing. Yes, he was probably going to end up being this most simplistic villain in this entire story, but it's not a bad thing. But it does hurt like some of the things that I was looking for tension, as well as to keep me invested in Piju's story. And I think having something happen around the middle or something like that, unless of course I'm completely in my tired state, completely missing something about it. Um, it didn't leave enough of an impression to matter either way. Honestly, if it did. Either way, though, don't let my detractions from it take it out. Like, if you add, like, if Hawkins Austin like manages, like, I'm still reading the Bone God, but he seems to be managing his villain a lot better than that. But also, it's kind of something that rips out the bones of people. So it's kind of got that body horror aspect going on. The Ghost Warrior kind of didn't. So it's I don't know. Like the thing about the best ghost stories I've ever read have always had the ghost show up randomly and have people talk about the ghost quite a bit, but never in an academic sense. It's always in the sense of, oh, I was walking down the street and the ghost waved its lantern at me, shrieking like a banshee. And I think something like that, some more presence to it would have done much. And even though it would have been a threat, it would have strained the disbelief about the Ruwad's atheism, anti spirituality, materialism, whatever you want to call it. It wouldn't have, I don't think it would have hurt the narrative much at all overall to just sort of like mix that whole part in. And probably all these things are connected. And it's sort of like stuck in the bit where it's like the author can't go too crazy spiritual about it while maintaining the Ruwad and materialism. Um, but in my opinion, I don't think the Ruwad materialism would have sacrificed much um, to be removed for the story. So that's my 2 cents. Overall, though, this book is excellent. It's got some of the best world building around. It's got some of the best character interactions and stuff like that around for like historical fiction. Like I'm not a big fan of like uh, sort of realistic fantasy, and I'm not a big fan of like witches and stuff running around sorcery. But this book did like hit it for me because it's got that great balance to it that never really kind of goes away, even though. See the cover again. Such a great cover. Even though that I do have some complaints about us, an aspect of it that's probably all connected now that I'm thinking about it. Overall, though, it didn't really diminish my enjoyment of the book to such an extent that I put it down, nor did I find it so unpleasant and illogical that I was offended by it, like a magician's trying to put on a cheap trick to me, thinking I'm a rube, which I am, but I know some tricks. Either way, I do hope you guys check it out and enjoy The Broken Man by Hawkins Austin. This is the Reading Rainbow Emperor. Thank you for joining me tonight. I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.